Imagine finding a trail of footprints frozen in volcanic ash footprints, left 36 million years ago by creatures that walked exactly like you and me. Now imagine discovering that the species we thought made those prints wasn't alone. What? If I told you that while Lucy, the most famous fossil ever found, was walking upright across ancient Ethiopia, another mysterious species was doing the exact same thing right beside her? A species so different that it's forcing us to completely rewrite the story of how humans learn to walk. This isn't just about discovering new fossils. This is about realizing that human evolution wasn't a straight path from apes to us. It was a wild experiment with multiple species trying, failing, and competing to master something we take for granted every single day. Walking on two legs, the truth is far stranger than anything we learned in school. November 1974. The Ethiopian sun is absolutely brutal, baking the Hatter Badlands into something that feels more like the surface of Mars than Earth. Donald Johanson and Tom Gray are trudging through this prehistoric graveyard, squinting at the ground, looking for, honestly, scraps. That's what paleoanthropology was back then, a jigsaw puzzle where someone had thrown away 99% of the pieces. You'd find a tooth here, maybe a jaw fragment there, and from these tiny clues, you were supposed to figure out how apes became humans. It was frustrating, tedious work that required equal parts scientific expertise and blind optimism, and then Johansen sees it. A small bone jutting from the sediment, an arm bone. But something about it looks different. Within hours, they realize what they found. And it's not just different, it's unprecedented. They're looking at a nearly complete skeleton of a creature that died 32 million years ago. In a field where finding a complete jawbone makes you famous, this is like winning the lottery, getting struck by lightning, and discovering Atlantis all on the same day. That evening, the team is celebrating, and someone puts on the Beatles' Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds. The song plays on repeat while they're drinking, laughing, and probably not quite believing what they've stumbled upon. And that's how paleontology's most famous fossil got her name, not from some carefully considered scientific designation, but from a Beatles song playing at a party in the Ethiopian desert. Lucy, the name stuck, and within a few years, she'd become the most recognized fossil on the planet, the face of human evolution itself. But here's where Lucy gets really interesting, because her skeleton is basically an anatomical contradiction that shouldn't make sense. Look at her pelvis. It's got this distinctive bowl shape that screams, "I walk upright." The iliac bones flare outward in exactly the right way. The hip socket angles perfectly for two-legged locomotion. This is not the pelvis of a creature that spends most of its time in trees. This is built for walking across open ground, for covering distance, for a life lived primarily on two legs. And yet, her skull? It houses a brain barely bigger than a modern chimpanzee's. We're talking about 400 cubic centimeters compared to our 1,400. So you've got this creature that's mastered upright walking, one of the most complex biomechanical achievements in mammalian evolution, but with a brain that's essentially still ape-sized. That's not how we thought this worked. The old story was simple. Big brains came first, and then we climbed down from the trees. Lucy flipped that script completely. Now look at her hands. Those finger bones aren't just slightly curved, they're dramatically curved, designed for one thing: gripping branches with serious strength. The muscle attachment sites on her arm bones tell the same story. She had the powerful upper body of a dedicated climber. The kind of adaptations you see in animals that spend significant time in trees. And here's the kicker. These weren't leftover features slowly disappearing. These were robust, actively used adaptations. Lucy wasn't just capable of climbing. She was built for it. So what are we looking at here? A creature with the pelvis of a human, the brain of an ape, and the arms of a tree-dwelling specialist. She's walking upright across ancient Ethiopia, but she's also climbing trees regularly. It's like evolution couldn't decide what it wanted her to be. The paleontology world went absolutely wild for Lucy. Finally, they had their missing link. Here was tangible, Undeniable proof of the transition from four-legged apes to two-legged humans, frozen at what seemed like the perfect moment. In evolutionary time, her species, Australopithecus afarensis, appeared to represent that pivotal moment when our ancestors came down from the canopy and started the long journey toward becoming human. This was the bridge between worlds, the evolutionary turning point that scientists had been searching for since Darwin first proposed that humans evolved from ape-like ancestors. Research expeditions flooded into Ethiopia. Every major museum wanted a Lucy reconstruction. Textbooks were rewritten with her at the center of the human origin story. For decades, Lucy dominated every conversation about where we came from. She was the grandmother of humanity, the 3-million-year-old matriarch of our entire lineage. Kids learned about her in school. Scientists built entire careers studying her species. Lucy wasn't just famous, she was the definitive example of early bipedalism, the fossil that finally made sense of our evolutionary past. But here's the thing about scientific certainty. It has a funny way of falling apart when you keep digging. And those same Ethiopian badlands that produced Lucy? They were hiding something that would completely upend her singular importance in the story of human evolution. Because while scientists were celebrating Lucy as the one true ancestor, the ground was literally full of evidence that the story was far more complicated, far messier, and far more interesting than anyone had imagined. The neat linear path from apes to humans that Lucy seemed to represent, it was about to get seriously tangled. 2 years before Lucy would become a household name, Mary Leakey's team was working in Tanzania when they stumbled upon something that would provide what no fossil skeleton ever could direct, evidence of how our ancestors actually moved. Picture this. 36 million years ago, a volcano erupts in what's now Laetoli, Tanzania. Fine ash blankets the landscape, creating this perfect, pristine surface. And then, before it fully hardens, 3 individuals walk across it, their footprints sink into the ash. And then, through geological luck that seems almost impossible, another eruption seals those prints under more layers of volcanic material, preserving them for millions of years. Finding fossilized footprints is incredibly rare. You need the perfect storm of geological conditions, the right kind of sediment, the right timing, the right preservation circumstances. It's like trying to find a photograph from a moment in time when cameras didn't exist yet, and yet here they were, a 90-foot trail containing about 70 individual footprints. 3 separate individuals who'd walked across this fresh volcanic debris, their steps frozen in time by pure geological chance. The largest prints measured about 85 inches long, suggesting someone roughly 4 feet tall. The smaller tracks showed companions of different sizes traveling together. But it wasn't just the size that made scientists' jaws drop. It was the detail. We're talking about footprints so well preserved that you could see exactly how these ancient walkers moved, how their weight shifted with each step, how their feet contacted and left the ground. This wasn't just evidence of bipedalism. This was a biomechanical blueprint, a 3.5-million-year-old instruction manual for how Lucy's species actually walked. And when scientists analyzed those footprints, they discovered something that honestly shouldn't have been possible for creatures with ape-sized brains. Each print showed a clear heel strike. They were landing on their heels first, just like you and me. Then the foot rolled forward through the step in that distinctly human way that's completely different from how apes move. The impressions captured longitudinal arches running from heel to toe, that crucial shock-absorbing feature that makes efficient bipedal walking possible. But here's what really blew everyone's mind. The big toe pointed straight forward, lined up with the other digits, not diverging outward like the opposable thumb toe that modern apes use for gripping branches. These hominins had committed to ground-based locomotion in a way that was fundamentally human. The stride measurements showed consistent pace and direction. The pressure patterns within each print revealed weight distribution that matched modern human walking. Some prints even preserved evidence of toe gripping, showing these walkers could adjust their gait for different terrain. This was fully mastered bipedalism, not some tentative evolutionary experiment. Lucy's species, Australopithecus afarensis, the species scientists believed made these tracks, had achieved walking efficiency that matched ours in almost every measurable way. And they'd done it 36 million years ago, long before developing larger brains or sophisticated tools. The timeline we'd constructed in our heads was completely backward. Walking didn't come after intelligence, it came first, millions of years before cognitive advances. But wait, if they were such perfect walkers, why did Lucy and her relatives keep those powerful climbing adaptations? Those curved finger bones, those robust arm muscles, those elongated limb proportions that looked more like chimpanzees than terrestrial bipeds? The Laetoli footprints proved they'd mastered walking, but the fossil evidence screamed that they were still spending serious time in trees. And then, in 2010, researchers working at deyiremeda in Ethiopia found something that made the puzzle even weirder. They discovered animal bones with what looked like cut marks, linear scratches that appeared systematic. Deliberate, these weren't. Random damage from natural processes. They looked like evidence of stone tools being used to butcher meat, to deflesh carcasses, to access bone marrow. And these bones dated back 34 million years, potentially associated with afarensis paste. On the geographic and temporal context, let that sink in for a second. We're talking about small-brained hominins, creatures with cognitive abilities roughly equivalent to modern chimpanzees, potentially using stone tools to systematically process animal carcasses. This was supposed to require advanced cognition, larger brains, the kind of planning and foresight that afarensis theoretically didn't possess. The discovery pushed the timeline of human technological innovation back by hundreds of thousands of years, and it challenged everything scientists thought they knew about the relationship between brain size and tool use. Except, not everyone's convinced. The scientific community is seriously divided on this one. Some researchers argue that the marks could have been made by crocodile teeth, which can create linear scratches that superficially resemble tool marks. Trampling by large mammals, geological processes. There are alternative explanations, and here's another problem. Isotopic analysis of afarensis teeth shows a diet dominated by woodland plants with minimal evidence of significant meat consumption. So if they weren't eating much meat over their lifetimes, why would they be butchering animals? The debate remains unresolved, and honestly, that's what makes it fascinating. Whether afarensis actually used stone tools or not, the controversy revealed something crucial. Early hominin behavior was far more complex and varied than we'd imagined. And that complexity was about to get even more mind-bending. So we've got Lucy and her species walking around ancient Ethiopia with their perfect bipedal gait and mysterious climbing habits, right? Scientists had constructed this neat story where afarensis represented the evolutionary transition, bridge between apes and humans, and then researchers working in the exact same Ethiopian regions where Lucy had thrived found jaw fragments and teeth that made everyone's carefully constructed narrative completely fall apart. Meet Australopithecus deyiremeda, a completely different hominin species that lived between 33 and 35 million years ago. Let me repeat that because it's important. This species lived in the same place, at the same time, as Lucy's species. We're not talking about a predecessor or a descendant. We're talking about two distinct bipedal species sharing the same landscapes, the same water sources, the same food resources for hundreds of thousands of years. The timeline overlap is undeniable, and it demolishes the neat linear progression that textbooks had been teaching for decades. Human evolution wasn't a single species gradually transforming from ape to human, like some Pokemon evolution. It was multiple species coexisting, competing, experimenting with different survival strategies all at once. The fossil record wasn't showing us a ladder. It was showing us a branching bush with multiple experiments happening simultaneously. And the anatomical differences between these species? They were immediately obvious and striking. Deyiremeda had robust jawbones with thick enamel on their molars, the kind of dental equipment you need for processing tough, fibrous plant materials. Their dental arcade was more rectangular compared to the parabolic shape found in afarensis, suggesting completely different feeding mechanics and food processing strategies. These weren't subtle variations. These were fundamental differences in how these species made their living. But here's where it gets really wild. Foot bones recovered at a site called Bipedal and later definitively attributed to deyiremeda, through additional fossil discoveries, revealed something that shouldn't have been possible. This species had a grasping foot with an opposable big toe that diverged from the other digits like a thumb. Remember those Laetoli footprints with the perfectly aligned, forward-pointing big toe? Deyremeda's foot was nothing like that. Think about the biomechanical implications for a second. That divergent big toe made deyiremeda excellent climbers. You need that opposable grip to wrap around tree branches effectively. But it would have severely compromised their ability to achieve the efficient heel-to-toe rolling motion that characterized afarensis walking patterns. Instead, deyiremeda likely pushed off from their second toe during bipedal locomotion, creating a fundamentally different walking mechanism. Each step would have required compensations for the lack of a rigid foot platform. This means their bipedalism was energetically expensive and mechanically inefficient for long-distance ground travel. They could walk upright, absolutely, but their version of walking was a completely different experiment than what afarensis had perfected. It prioritized maintaining superior climbing capabilities over perfecting terrestrial efficiency. Two species, both bipedal, both living in the same place, but solving the challenge of upright locomotion in completely different ways. Isotopic analysis of their tooth enamel backed this up. Deyiremeda consumed a diet heavily dominated by forest resources, leaves, fruits, tree-based foods. Their carbon isotope signatures showed they were spending considerable time in woodland environments, with minimal evidence of grassland plant consumption. Meanwhile, afarensis showed a mixed dietary signature that reflected their exploitation of both woodland and grassland resources. They were eating different things, living in overlapping but distinct ecological niches. This dietary differentiation probably explains how they managed to coexist without one species driving the other to extinction. Deyiremeda was more primitive overall, displaying stronger arboreal specializations and using bipedalism primarily as a way to move between trees and access forest canopy resources more effectively. They were the tree specialists who could walk when needed. Afarensis, on the other hand, had committed to efficient ground-based locomotion while retaining climbing abilities, primarily for safety for escaping predators, for sleeping sites elevated above the dangers that prowled the ground at night. The coexistence of these species destroys any notion of a simple evolutionary path, rather than a single lineage gradually transitioning from apes to humans. The fossil record reveals a complex branching pattern with multiple species testing different combinations of locomotion, diet, and habitat preferences. Each experiment represented a viable survival strategy under the environmental conditions of Pliocene East Africa. Evolution wasn't trying to make humans, it was just trying out different ways to survive. And multiple approaches worked simultaneously. Some of these experiments led nowhere, evolutionary dead ends that eventually went extinct without leaving descendants. But others possessed the adaptive flexibility to survive the intense pressures of climate shifts, predator competition, and environmental changes that characterized this period. The rigorous, multi-million-year process of natural selection gradually winnowed down these multiple experiments until only the most adaptable lineages remained. And here's the kicker: we're the result of whichever lineage had the greatest flexibility, the best combination of adaptations for a changing world. Our complex modern bipedalism, with its arched foot, non-divergent big toe, and efficient energy expenditure, wasn't the inevitable outcome of evolution. It was one successful experiment among many. the survivor of a fierce competition that played out over millions of years across the ancient landscapes of East Africa. The story of how humans learned to walk isn't the neat, linear progression we were taught in school. It's messy, experimental, and far more fascinating than any simplified textbook narrative. Lucy wasn't the lonely bridge between apes and humans. She was one player in a crowded field of evolutionary experiments, each species testing different strategies for survival in a dangerous, changing world. Think about what we've uncovered here. Multiple bipedal species walking the same ancient Ethiopian landscapes at the same time. One species perfecting efficient ground-based locomotion while keeping their climbing insurance policy. Another maintaining superior tree-climbing abilities while experimenting with a completely different style of upright walking. Both strategies worked. Both species survived for hundreds of thousands of years. And that's the real lesson here. Evolution doesn't have a goal. It's not trying to make humans. It's just trying out different solutions to the problem of survival. And sometimes multiple solutions work simultaneously. The footprints of Laetoli prove that our ancestors mastered walking long before they developed large brains or sophisticated tools. The controversial cut marks at Deyiremeda suggest that maybe intelligence and technological innovation emerged earlier and in more complex ways than we thought possible. And the discovery of deyiremeda demolishes any remaining notion that human evolution followed a straight path. We are not the inevitable outcome of evolution. We're the descendants of whichever experimental lineage happened to have the right combination of adaptations when climate shifted, when food sources changed, when competition intensified. Our ability to walk upright, something we do without thinking every single day, is the result of millions of years of evolutionary trial and error, of species rising and falling, of countless experiments in bipedalism playing out across ancient Africa. So the next time you take a walk, remember, you're using a biomechanical system that was refined over millions of years, through fierce competition between multiple species. Those arched feet, that forward-pointing big toe, that efficient heel-to-toe stride, they're not just random features. They're the legacy of an evolutionary arms race that we won, not because we were destined to, but because our particular combination of adaptations turned out to be flexible enough to survive when others couldn't. If this kind of deep dive into human origins fascinates you, if you want to keep exploring the weird, complex, and often surprising truths about where we came from, then stick around. There are so many more stories buried in the fossil record, so many more assumptions waiting to be challenged, so many more mysteries about our ancient past that science is only beginning to unravel. Hit that subscribe button, because the story of human evolution is far from over, and it's way more interesting than anyone ever told you. What other aspects of human evolution do you think we've oversimplified? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear what fascinates you most about our ancient past.